Well, good afternoon or good evening, everybody, and welcome to our presentation, our webinar about approaching post-secondary education, 7 blended PBLA modules for stage 2. Okay. So today's webinar is somewhat of a capstone for the theme of preparing for post-secondary education. New Language Solutions has developed 7 modules for stage 2 under this theme, and they all can be found in the Avenue course builder. These modules are useful for parents of young adults attending post-secondary education, or if they want to attend post-secondary education themselves. And as you will see, they can be used not just under the education theme, but some of them are also a great fit for financial literacy or for employment. To begin, we will give you a general overview of the first 6 modules that we've developed in the past few years, because there are 3 modules for CLB 5-6 and 3 for CLB 7-8. But next, we will take a detailed look at the skills and real-world tasks covered in the last module, and that one's for CLB 7-8, exploring pathways to regulated professions. And we'll finish the presentation with an overview of competency areas covered in this theme. So throughout this session, we will discuss practical suggestions for including feedback and encouraging independent learning when using these modules in a blended program. We'll highlight examples in each module as they relate to goal setting, peer feedback, reflection, etc. Dori, would you tell us about the first 2 modules under the post-secondary education theme?
Absolutely, I will, yes. So the first 2 modules we want to show you, we're going to show them in pairs. So the first pair we would like to show you focus on the very first steps towards post-secondary education, which is exploring available courses and institutions, making comparisons, and making a choice, finally. The CLB 5-6 module is called Communicating Choices for College. And on the slide, you can see the real-world tasks for this module. So it starts by discussing interests with friends in the listening and speaking section about preferred professions, interests, goals. And then in the second part, under reading and writing, learners take a further step by reaching out to a college counselor and also reading about an open house. So as they make this switch in the module from friendly discussions to more official communication, there are several skill building activities that focus on levels of formality, both in speaking and writing. And then let's look at the CLB 7-8 module, which is called Deciding on a College Program. This module also includes potentially new background information to learners about how colleges in North America market themselves. So think about open houses or virtual tours, and in a sense, their websites as well. So there's certainly an opportunity here to include critical thinking skills around how to approach the information found on the websites or in these virtual tours. This module, Deciding on a College Program, moves away from personal interactions and focuses more on independent research. So as I said, watching the virtual tours, reading websites, taking notes, and presenting to a group. So let's look at a little bit at how these 2 modules promote different forms of feedback and reflection. Each module, each of the new language solution modules open with an introduction forum in Avenue, where learners are prompted to think about the content of the module and also what they have challenges with and what they want to improve. So in this module, Communicating Choices for College, the introduction forum asks learners about their experiences with communicating in English at different levels of formality. And this is a very informal activity where students get to interact with each other online. And this gets a little bit more specific with the goal setting form that's included in the module package in the PDF document that's included in Avenue, along with a list of language skills that this module focuses on. So to give you a couple examples from this particular module, skills include making small talk, following proper email structure, expressing preferences in speaking and writing, just to mention a few. And so in this goal setting form, learners are asked to think about the skills, their current abilities, what they wish to improve, and to set personal goals that they will come back to at the end of the module. And in the 7-8 CLB 7-8 module, deciding on a college program, I decided to take a look at a writing skill building activity. So in this module, the final task under writing is to summarize a course description. And in one of the skill building activities that prepare learners for this final task, learners read a description of an English course, of a language course, and they have to create the outline in the provided table, paragraph by paragraph. So you can see the handout on the slide. This task is followed by a peer feedback form in the bottom, which is similar to the skill using and assessment task that follow the skill building tasks. So learners are given the criteria and they have to evaluate their partners. This way, they start working with the given criteria in mind, and also by considering the other person's mistakes, they become more aware of their own challenges, or at least that's the hope. So this is one example of peer feedback in a skill building activity, but all the skill using tasks across all modules and all skills are set up in a way that provides opportunity for peer feedback. So these two modules that I just talked about looked at options and decisions before going to school. What about the next pair of modules, Marijke?
Yeah, I've got some information about that. The focus in these two modules is on academic skills, such as researching information and participating in group projects. And those skills are also important in a professional environment, obviously, not just for post-secondary education. The CLB 5-6 module uses many graphs and images about economic topics, such as population, employment, transportation. There's a collection of different maps of Canada that show different kinds of information. And these charts and graphs can all be found in news articles or on websites. So they're very real world. But the way they are used, learners are prepared for an academic environment. In the CLB 5-6 modules, the real world tasks are, first of all, listening to instructions to draw a graph. So listening to a teacher. Then giving instructions to a friend on how to find information online. In this case, looking for a book in a library catalog, an online catalog. Then also learners read a short text with 2 to 3 paragraphs, but there's a graph with the text. And then finally, they describe a graph and they write their own paragraph about what they see. So for CLB 7-8, the order of the skills is a little bit different. Here, the real world tasks are first reading about groups and group work, and then listening to instructions to complete a group project, also in an academic environment. And then learners give instructions to a group of their peers on how to use an online tool. And finally, they write a comparison of two online tools of their choice. So they're using a lot of the information and the skills that they've practiced. So it's also worth mentioning that the CLB 5-6 module offers almost all of the activities, both in printed form and as online learning objects. So you have a choice to use either. And the CLB 7-8 module is fully blended. So there's a flow between what you do in class and what you do, what learners do online. Right. So let's look at a few examples from these modules. In the skill building activity, speaking strategies, learners first brainstorm strategies in a group, and then they compare their ideas with the text and reflect on how they could use these strategies. Finally, learners work with a partner to apply and practice two of the strategies. So in this module, the skill using and assessment tasks include a learner self-assessment with reflective questions. For example, do you prefer reading a graph or a text? And learners can also compare their self-reflection on the task with the feedback that they received from the instructor. Working in groups is something that we do often in Canada at all levels of education and in the workplace and also in the LINK program. And we can learn a lot about ourselves from working in a group. How do we respond to group dynamics? What role are we most comfortable with? Do we take the lead, or do we prefer just to keep track of the time, like not so upfront? So in this module for CLB 7-8, learners get to experience and reflect on group work in a variety of tasks. As I already mentioned, the module is fully blended, and it is perfect for the flipped approach. The teaching notes for each activity give clear instructions for which activities learners can do independently at home to prepare for group activities that follow in class. In this module, learners also learn about online tools, such as Grammarly, how to edit and provide feedback to their peers, on a written piece. The culminating task in this module, where learners combine everything that they've learned, is to write a comparative essay. And I have a screenshot of that. There we go. So in the skill using task, we've set up a workshop, and it's set up for groups so learners can provide feedback on each other's work. And the way the workshop module is set up, it's a Moodle plugin. The instructor only has to make the next stage available. So in the first stage, learners write their work. In the second stage, they get feedback. And then in the third stage, it's submitted to the teacher. And you can see in the screenshot that they submit their final draft with an assignment as well. Of course, if you prefer to do this in class, in person, learners can also exchange their work and give each other feedback on paper. That's not a problem.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
Dori,
Thank you.
over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so far we looked at choosing a school and developing academic skills while in school. And so the last pair of modules that I'd like to talk about looks at a slightly more daunting question, which is how do we pay for school? So the next two modules look at financial aid, the different types, eligibility requirements, and the application processes. the CLB 5-6 module is called Navigating Student Aid for Post-Secondary Education. And so this module sort of eases learners into the topic with some details about the cost of post-secondary education in Canada, available financial aid options such as scholarships, bursaries, grants, but also student loans and student lines of credit, while the CLB 7-8 module, applying for financial aid, gives more detail on both the financial products and also the application processes. So you could see the real world tasks on the slide. And now let's look at some examples of how these two modules help instructors give feedback. Let's take, for example, the speaking assessment task in the CLB 5-6 module, Navigating Student Aid for Post-Secondary Education. That's a good example of how evaluation and feedback is set up. So the assessment task in this module under speaking is talk to a partner about the pros and cons of student loans based on a task card. So learners can complete this task in class or online in breakout rooms. In both cases, they receive a task card, the evaluation form with the criteria, which is different for CLB 5 and 6, as well as the instructions for the task, which also contain the evaluation criteria in simple terms. So they are always aware in advance what it is that they will be marked on during the task, and they have the criteria throughout the entire activity. And since the skill using task is very similar in setup to the assessment task, by the time they get to the assessment task, they already had a chance to see how the evaluation process works. So they feel more comfortable, hopefully. And let's take a look at the CLB 7-8 module, applying for financial aid. So here we're looking at the skill using task, which is give instructions on how to apply for a scholarship, including documents to collect, forms to fill out, and so on. So again, there are different formats for the task. You can choose to complete this online, where learners can submit their recording in a quiz, or they can do it in the big blue button. And of course, there's always the option of completing the task in the classroom. But regardless of the format, learners can complete a self-assessment form, reflect on their mistakes, and make improvements before they attempt the assessment task. And so you can see this is the online self-assessment form in the form of a quiz question. So this was really just a snapshot of these 6 modules under post-secondary education. But if you want to learn more about these, then you can preview them in the course builder in Avenue, or you can watch the earlier webinars that go into more detail about the different skill building activities and the tasks and how the skills flow from one another to another. So there's a screenshot here on where to find these past webinars. So you can find the webinars on our modules, but also there are many other helpful presentations for teaching in Avenue. All right, so now let's look at our latest module, Marijke.
Yes, thank you, Dori. So let's look at the most recent module for CLB 7-8, which is Exploring Pathways to Regulated Professions. That's a mouthful. This module connects post-secondary education with employment. And before you take it to the classroom floor, ensure that learners have some awareness of regulated professions and skilled trades, that they know that there's a process to become licensed in these jobs, and that there are certain education requirements. You should also make sure that learners understand the purpose of bridging programs and that they know there are provincial and national regulatory bodies. A lot of the module is written with the understanding that learners have this background information, that they're already a little bit aware of it. And I should also mention that this is not a module that has a companion at CLB 5.6, and that choice was made consciously. We looked at the language expectations for many bridging programs and certification, and we felt that learners at CLB 5.6 would not meet those language requirements. So we chose to do a module just for CLB 7.8. So the real world tasks in this module are to listen to a presentation about the licensing process, then read descriptions and requirements of bridging programs, write messages to give updates to and ask advice from a mentor, and exchange information about the path to getting certified with a friend. And as you can see from the image here, we use 4 example professions in this module, and that's a plumber, an electrician, a pharmacy technologist, and a practical nurse. So 2 skilled trades and 2 professions. So in this module, listening is the first skill. So there is some skill building to do to begin with. And in the getting started section, which is where you'll find that forum that Dori already discussed, there's also general vocabulary building activities, such as the skill building, making predictions based on introductions. And here learners listen to some short introductions of speakers, and also they watch the beginning of a TED Talk. They practice predicting what will follow, and unlike Nostradamus, they will get to check if they were right. Then the next skill building is understanding main and subordinate ideas, which looks at text structure. And the third skill building is understanding facts and opinions in personal narrative. In the online component, learners listen to Biruk, who's an electrician. I think he's from Ethiopia, I'm not sure. And they distinguish facts from opinions, which is something that they will also need to understand for the writing and speaking tasks. So for the final listening tasks, we imagine that someone might attend a symposium for newcomers, or listen to a guest speaker in a bridging program. And the skill using is understanding a presentation about nursing certification, and the assessment task is listening to a speech about getting certified as a plumber. And while the topics are nursing and plumbing, the information in the tasks is general enough that all of your learners will be able to understand it and use the information. It's valuable information for any pathway to certification. I also want to point out that if you do both the skill using and the assessment task, then only one of them should count towards the PDLA artifacts in the binder, because we're always being told by our PDLA reviewer that there shouldn't be any double dipping. It's also important to mention that in the PDF file of the module package, the assessment tasks are all grouped together at the end. So for all of the 4 skills, the assessment tasks are together. And that includes the answer keys and the task cards and things like that. Learner handouts and all of the audio files can be found in a folder in the For Teacher section on the course on Avenue. So there's the audio for skill using and separate audio for the assessment task. So these are the skill building activities for reading. It starts with comparing hard and soft skills, which is focused on understanding text structure again, but through the content and follow-up in class, learners also get to reflect and think about their own hard and soft skills. Understanding details through relative clauses is a grammar skill building activity, and I know teachers love grammar, so way to go, Dori, for making that one. And learners read about how plumbers protect pipes from the freezing cold in Canadian winters, and they find instances of relative clauses in the text. And in the third skill building activity, reading a course outline, learners apply skimming and scanning strategies to pages in the language companion, which can be online or on paper, and also to a program description of a practical nursing program. As mentioned before, we often use the flipped approach for the skill building activities. So learners complete self-correcting activities online and they prepare for class and they have all the opportunities to practice. And then during the synchronous or face-to-face class, they use what they've learned from the online practice. And we hope and we feel that this approach will enhance responsibilities of learners for their own learning. That is, if they didn't complete the online activity and the preparation for class, then participating in their group activities during class time will not be so much fun. So the skill using and assessment tasks are quite similar in setup. Both can be done either on paper or online, and the online activities are partially self-correcting, except for a few open-ended questions, which means that learners can get rapid feedback when they do it online on how they did on most of the questions. If you use the paper version of the skill using activity, then learners can also exchange work and mark each other's work and provide feedback to each other. We always advise that they should not erase their mistakes, but use a different color pen to write the correct answers, because that allows them to see their mistakes and learn from them. But we also recommend that you still check the open-ended questions when you use peer feedback for reading. We found that learners are more strict sometimes when it comes to marking than teachers. So reading a bridging program description uses a text about a program for electricians, and the assessment task, reading about a bridging program, looks at a program for pharmacy technicians. And the task is differentiated for CLB 8 with an additional page and some extra questions. So Dori, over to you again. What's next?
Thank you. So let's look at the next two skills. So as you've seen in this module, receptive skills are first, and that's because there is quite a bit of content about the licensing process that we wanted learners to first get familiar with so that they can complete the productive skill tasks with a little bit more confidence. So the real world task under writing, which is the next skill, is composing an email to a mentor about steps taken in the licensing process and asking for guidance on how to proceed. And for CLB 8, there's an additional part, which is to describe a challenge that they encountered. In each module, in each of our modules, we try to include skill building activities for language skills that were not part of other modules, that didn't have skill building in other modules. So in this particular module, we included skill building activities on perfect tenses and linear order in emails. But of course, there is more, always more to a task than just 2 language points. So we always want to encourage instructors to check the additional resources page in the PDF, in the module package, because it has a list of activities that will help learners prepare for the tasks, and often these activities focus on different language points. So, for example, the module that we just discussed a couple minutes ago, applying for financial aid, has a skill building activity for introducing the purpose of an email message, and another skill building activity for connecting paragraphs of an email. So both of those would be very useful in this task, and that's why it's a good idea to check the additional resources page. So let's look at the skill building activities under writing a little bit more. As I said, the first activity is using perfect tenses in written narratives. So in this activity, learners review the use and form of the present and past perfect tenses, both simple and continuous. They look at how they are used in emails that are similar to the final task, which they will have to write. And between the online practice and the in-class lesson, they need to write some sentences about events in their own lives using each of the tenses that they reviewed in the online activity. And that's because we find that connecting the classwork to personal experience provides more opportunity for reflection and understanding. And the second skill building activity, which is linear order in emails. So here learners again look at examples of email messages, and they look more closely to the order of topics in them. So here again, there is a homework slide or an extension activity so that we connect the online portion to the in-class portion. So here, it's not personal experience that we're working with, but the application of what they learned or reviewed online. So in this case, learners read an email that's a very poor example of linear order, and they have to make suggestions on how to improve it. And so that's the homework, and eventually during the in-class session, they will rewrite that email to have further practice. And so after skill building, we get to the skill using an assessment task, which in this case is the email sent to a mentor. So the concept of a mentor, of a professional mentor, might be one of these new concepts for learners. So we try to make sure to include different examples of what a mentor does throughout the listening and the reading tasks as well. And so as Marijke explained, we used 4 professions as examples. And here under writing, the skill using task is writing a message from the perspective of a plumber, while the assessment task is about a practical nurse. And as I said, by now, hopefully throughout the listening and reading activities, learners have a deeper understanding of the different certification processes, but still, the tasks include task cards so that it is not the content that the learners are tested on, so that they are given the content and they have to just focus on the language component. Similarly to the other skills, both tasks, both skill using and assessment tasks, can be completed in class or online. And the skill using task has the option of filling out a self-assessment form, but the assessment task is marked by the instructor with the help of a rubric. So the rubric is included online as well as in the paper version. All right, and so our module closes with a speaking task where learners give advice to one another about the process of getting licensed. This task is the culmination of the module. So as here learners have to integrate everything they practiced so far. So describing steps taken, describing the challenges, sharing advice, possible solution, and so on. And so they can work with all the content that they've learned throughout the module, as well as personal experience. So let's look at these tasks a bit more in detail. The first skill building is about steering the conversation. So in the online activity, they listen to examples of interrupting, resuming the conversation, and changing the topic. During the in-class session, they can practice these conversation strategies in pairs while discussing the topic of networking, just to take a short break from the licensing process, but not to go too far from employment. And there's a second skill building activity, which is about different structures to give advice and suggestions. And as I said before, we try not to develop activities that were covered in previous modules. So since another module already has skill building activities on giving advice using modal verbs, here we decided to focus on different phrases such as, have you thought about doing this? Or why don't you try this or that? So not to say that modal verbs don't come in handy for this task. And so that's for this reason, if you wish to include that in your course, you can just go to the module we mentioned already, applying for financial aid, and assign the activity from there, which is expressing a range of functions with modal verbs. Again, found under additional resources. And so the final task for both speaking and the module is giving and asking for advice about the licensing process. And it's a task to be completed in pairs. So when they complete this online, learners use breakout rooms in the big blue button, where they have the task card and the criteria displayed. And for the skill using task, there's also a self-assessment form, which is in a separate quiz activity. And so I mentioned earlier that for the speaking task, learners have to integrate the knowledge and the language skills obtained throughout this module. For this reason, they do receive a task card, and you can see the task card on the slide. So it is partially complete because even though we don't want to test them on the content, we did want to have a small portion where they can insert their own ideas. So for both the challenges and the tips, they have to add 1 point under each topic. And we talked about goal setting in the very beginning of our presentation. So now I wanted to circle back to that and the overall theme of feedback and reflection. So this is the end of module reflection form. So here, learners can think back on the skills practiced throughout the whole module and compare them with their goal setting form and see what they improved and what they still have challenges with, and fill out this form and add it to their portfolio. So this was our latest module, our last module in our presentation, exploring pathways to regulated professions. Before we close this webinar, we wanted to look at the competency areas in all the modules that we talked about today. And this is a lot of information, there's a lot included in this table. On the left side, you can see the abbreviations for all the modules in the order that we talked about them. So first you have communicating choices for college for CLB 5 and 6, then the corresponding deciding on a college program, and then all the way down to the last one, which is exploring pathways to regulated professions. And we really just wanted to show how there's always a variety of competency areas within the modules as well as across them. So really, except maybe for the first module where it's all interacting with others, all the other modules offer a variety of competency areas. And we wanted to ask you about your experience with assessing these skills slash competency areas. And Marijke, maybe you could
Yeah.
launch the poll. So if you wouldn't mind answering the question, which is
So which competency do you usually find the most difficult to do assessments for? And I know that they don't go across all of the skills. Just to
so
give us
I
a
can't
glimpse.
answer the poll. I don't know if I don't know if
No, I think as a host we can't answer, but
okay.
our
Okay.
our
Okay,
guests
now I see the answers.
should
Okay.
be.
Okay, so we have comprehending instructions and giving instructions slash reproducing information.
Yeah. And you can actually choose more than one. So if you feel like, oh, there's two that are really challenging to do assessments for, feel free to choose those. But it looks like we've got 100% response, so we'll end it and I'll share the results. And as you can see, giving instructions or reproducing information is challenging. Yeah, and I agree with you, especially for writing, reproducing information at the higher level that can be, you get into summarizing, right? It's challenging, but we've got some activities for that. Interacting with others is not hard. Comprehending information typically is not hard. So hopefully with this group of modules, you will have some more options.
I guess there's less real world tasks, right? Like on the daily basis,
Yeah,
we reproduce information much less than interact with others.
yeah, that's true. Well, I think in an educational environment, we do reproduce information. We take notes and we summarize things, and we work with others to exchange information for a project or something like that. What I really like about this overview is that it shows, like, across the modules, all of the competencies and all of the skills are addressed. And I also wanted to mention, as Dori indicated, if you want extra practice, you can always go to one of the other modules to see, is there any skill building that I can do? Because even though the topic for the module might be different, the theme is the same as post-secondary education. So the chance that vocabulary and topics, like the example reading or the sample conversations that we've used, they're all applicable. They're all very similar in theme. So you can make your own super huge module if you wanted to.
Yes, that
All
would be
right.
quite a
Yeah.
large module.
Yeah. And the modules that we've developed, we aim for 2.5 to 3 weeks for a full-time class to be able to finish everything. If you're teaching a part-time class, then you either need longer or you don't do all 4 skills. That's also completely possible. So in the course builder, this is
Yes, so
where we can find
there's
them,
one
right?
last slide
Yeah.
a final screenshot of the course builder. So if you filter by theme and you'll click preparing for post-secondary education, that's where you'll find all 7 of the modules that we talked about today. So feel free to request them for a sandbox and to just review them, go through the activities, just get a feel for the flow and the types of exercises before you make a decision, right? And also the module package, it's just quite a long document and it takes a little time to go through it and figure out where's what. But it does have a lot of handouts, all the answer keys, additional resources, transcripts. So it is, I think it is very helpful for planning your course.
Yeah. Yeah, but I agree, Dori, that it's important that you review that entire module package, just to know what's coming, right? So you don't feel like, oh, I should give them a writing task about this or that, and then maybe the next activity is that writing task.
Yeah, good point.
Well, our overall theme, so to say, in this webinar was providing feedback, giving feedback, reflection. In what's really important for us is that we also get feedback from you guys. So at the top of each module, there's a link to an online survey where you can let us know if you've used an activity or a module and what you've used from that and how you feel about it. And what's really interesting is that the feedback that we've received, most instructors use all of the assessment tasks for reading and listening, because of course those are online quizzes that are self-correcting. Yay! But the speaking tasks are used least often. And we also can see that for all of those skill building activities that we shared some with you, that they use most of the skill building activities. So that's good news for us. I guess that we're doing not a half bad job. But we have one more question for you. And if you wanted to unmute yourself and share your experience with us, we have a couple more minutes left. In your classroom, like what kind of feedback tools do you use? Like what is easiest for your learners? How do you get them to reflect on their own learning and give feedback to their peers? Like, what's your experience with feedback and reflection?
Hi.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
I usually do more oral feedback, so we'll talk all together and I'll just ask them what they thought about the module or at the end. So we sort of have a conversation and a discussion about it informally, because I find that when I give them a written feedback, it's very difficult then the next day or the day after to go through it. I have to go through it first and then to discuss it, because then I have students that haven't been there, the attendance, there's very little participation after the fact. If I wait a couple of days, so immediately after we finish a module, we'll have a conversation about it, and it's a little bit more informal, and then they feel more relaxed to talk about how they feel. And that's for level 5, because it's very hard to get them to actually do a peer assessment as well, because they feel that they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings also. So or to maybe be honest about what they thought about the module, thinking that it's a reflection on me, perhaps, or the program. So that's what I do.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree with
you.
you that those things can be really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Something that our learners have to learn how to do.
They do. I mean, it's difficult for us as well. Like when, if we're asked to do a peer assessment or feedback, we have to be diplomatic about it. And so then there's language that has to be taught.
Yeah.
Certain language, like how do you sort of navigate something that you don't like or a negative into more language that is, easier to accept, perhaps,
encouraging.
right? And
For
that
sure.
vocabulary, is something that needs to be taught. They don't have that.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tatiana, she mentioned in the chat that she uses self-reflection and self-assessment. So that's great, having learners reflect on their own learning and their own progress. Yeah. Great.
I actually did the deciding on a college program in
Mhm.
September and October. I have 2 part-time 7/8 classes. So I did it double duty all
Right.
the way through, which was good. Um, so for the reflection, we worked on communication skills, but one of the things in the DCP that was good was um, having that bad presentation versus a good presentation, and having them be able to critique the bad presentation, was good. And we talk a lot about respect as well, and helping your partner learn. So I've done a lot of peer reflection, but only in pair groups in breakout rooms where it doesn't get shared with everybody.
Mhm.
And students starting there feel a little bit better about being able to do that, because it's talked about encourage them in something they did well, talk about maybe something they could improve, that kind of thing. And we had the whole list of um, communication skills, and so we started with that because it's a little more concrete, maybe
Right.
some other things like the content or the organization, but we sort of progressed through, so that worked out well. Um, I do have a question about one of the things I ended up doing, deciding on a college program, because that's what my actual students learned before I even found this module, which was great because I'm just new back to teaching after 6 years of managing. And so it was good. One of the things my students found at 7/8 with some of the more complex things, like there's lots of in the deciding on a college program, like summarizing or writing an outline. And it's quite a difficult task to get after just 1 or 2 skill building and 1 skill using. So I ended up adding probably 1 to 3 more skill using practices before I actually went to the assessment.
Mhm.
Tried to model them on what what was already there, but particularly in listening, it was, just so you know, I don't know how much real world stuff you can put into these without copyright issues. But UBC and the University of Regina both have a really great um, online introduction things and finding out about the thing. They both section them off into places, but I would choose different sections that were like a minute or 2 minutes, and then have them do certain ones and answer similar questions to what you had. I'm wondering, can you actually do that in this kind of situation? Like, can we take UBC's virtual tour or the U of R's virtual tour? Those were
That's
the 2 best ones I actually
yeah.
found. I mean,
Well,
yours that were simulated were very good. I was trying to
yeah.
find similar things. Not a lot of places have really good ones.
No, that was a challenge of finding material that was like at the level that we wanted and good enough. But the other challenge, as you mentioned, like the resources that New Language Solutions creates are created under a Creative Commons license, which means if we find something online, it has to be released under a Creative Commons license, or we have to create it ourselves. So that's kind of finding the balance. And the additional resources, Dori, correct me if I'm wrong, we can refer to other things, even if it's not Creative Commons, but we can't use it.
That's right.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, so we can't publish it as our own, but you can show it to learners as an example.
Yeah. So I think, Cindy, what you've done is great. You found some resources that maybe they might even be more local for your area, and then you can supplement the modules with those resources. One more thing to note, and Dori has mentioned it too, like there's always more skill building to do. And in our modules, we might have like 2, sometimes 3 skill building activities per skill. Part of the reason is that we are mandated by CCLB to keep it under 100 pages. And that's for CLB 7-8. And for CLB 5-6, they actually want it even less. But for CLB 7-8, we said, like, look, these reading texts alone are like 4 pages each. Like, there's no way that we can keep it so short. So we try. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And yeah, we hope to connect with you at another time.